Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Pillar Performance Podcast, a podcast where we sit down with the leaders in their field of research and high performance, as well as some of the founders and the creators of companies that are existing within this world of performance technology and endurance sports. At Pillar, we are on a mission to get athletes to the start line in their best conditions. We do that by developing very clinical micronutrition supplements across sleep, recovery, inflammation, energy, and immunity. And we hope that this podcast and the guests on it will actually help in that process for anyone who's listening. On this week's episode, I speak with Rasmus Barfred, the co-founder of THEMAGIC5, a sports technology company really paving the way forward for custom fit sportswear, but right now most famous for their first to market custom fit swim goggles. If you haven't seen them, you will very well see them very soon. Rasmus talks to us about his background as a young Danish kid, who's obviously very passionate, but also with a natural ability for endurance sports. What this journey took him through and into the world with his co-founders of launching the Magic 5, the learnings that they've all uncovered, some of the really key characteristics of the consumer behaviour within the global swimming market as a consumer group, which I found very interesting. Obviously where the company is today, but what they truly feel like their technology of custom fit sportswear can take the future of this category for athletes. It's a fantastic chat and I hope you enjoy. So Rasmus, again, thank you for having us and joining us on the podcast. What we're very keen to do today is obviously learn more about your background and the journey into the Magic 5, which for me, I think is one of the most innovative pieces of technology that I've seen in sport for a long time. As you guys can see behind me, I'm a closet swimming fan. So when the Magic 5 launched and I found out about what they were doing, it was incredibly intriguing. Like a lot of people, I'd struggled with finding a pair of goggles that would actually suit my face structure and allow me to be able to swim without leakage or without fogging. So I've personally always been interested in the Magic 5. And before we dive into the story, and I'm sure many people know about the Magic 5 as they shot to fame on the US Shark Tank with an amazing pitch and an amazing subsequent investment from Mark Cuban. But Rasmus, I really would love to learn a little bit more about your background as the co-founder of such an amazing technology. Obviously a Danish brand, but yeah, could you maybe start us a little bit about what it was like for you as a kid? Were you always in technology? Were you always in sport? What was life like prior to the Magic 5?
First off, Damon, thank you for having me in the Magic 5. Really, really appreciate that. Before the Magic 5, I think the common denominator is I've always been into sport. I always played soccer, love to run, and that's always been a big part of my life and still is, not at a competitive level, but I still like to spin the wheels on the bike and hit the pool for a swim. But I think when I was 18, 19 or so, I dipped my toes into endurance sport the first time. My cousin, who was 5 years older, he challenged me on doing this bike race in France called La Marmotte. I had no idea what it was, and I'd never been on a road bike, but went out and bought like an old aluminium frame. And long story short, 2 months later, I was at the foot of Alpe d'Huez and had to climb Col de Glandon, Telegraph, Galibier, and Alpe d'Huez in a single day. And for someone who I'd never done anything endurance related except for running as part of soccer, it was a pretty what the fuck experience, but I really enjoyed it and got through it in a good way. I think I learned that day that I have a knack for endurance stuff. I have a diesel. I found out that I have a diesel engine, so that kind of gave me a boost at the end of the race. But that was like the first experience in endurance sport. Then the following year, my aunt, she challenged me in a similar way of doing a triathlon. I had no idea what it was. No one in Denmark did triathlons. Very few people did. And a little bit similar story, but this time like 3 months ahead of the race, she challenged me in doing an Ironman in Copenhagen. It was called Challenge back then, before Ironman got the rights for the race in Copenhagen. But I had 3 months where I had to learn to swim and never run a marathon, and that's how I got into triathlon. I did my first Ironman when I think I was 18 or 19 at the time. So I was pretty young.
You did a full Ironman at 18?
Yeah, and I had no idea. I'd never been swimming. I did the bike race in France the year before, so I tried to be active for a lot of hours straight, but I'd never swum I'd never run a marathon. I ran a lot in soccer, but not a marathon. But same thing happened. I was thriving in the last few hours of the race, felt good, enjoyed the experience, and that kickstarted my interest in triathlon. And then I've kind of stayed with it. I stayed with it for a lot of years and really enjoyed it. And obviously that's where the idea came from. The idea didn't come from me. It came from my co-founder, Bo, who I'd done a few Ironmans, and he was training for an Ironman, and then he went on a training camp in Lanzarote and forgot his goggles. And he simply couldn't find goggles at this training camp that he could stand wearing. So when he came home, he called me and was like, hey, I've just spent $10,000 on a bike, all this equipment, and I can't find a bloody pair of goggles that fit. Like, it really messes up my swim. And he's a very recreational swimmer, not a fast guy in any sort of way, but he still had to get his kilometers in. And he just felt that it was so frustrating that every few hundred meters he had to stop and basically empty his goggles, right? And it was uncomfortable. And then we were like, okay, let's see if we can do something about that. And then everything snowballed from that point on.
So could I ask what year are we talking now? So and it's so common when a gap and an idea comes just like that, and it really does happen so quickly. And then I'm sure you're about to tell us from this moment when Bo discovered that there was definitely a gap or a need, particularly with triathlon, as you've said.
Yeah.
There's a huge pile of equipment that has already been a sunk cost for triathletes. And you were exactly right. He found this gap where goggles were this unanswered problem, where people were happy to spend small amounts of money on a very inferior product, right? And so what year are we talking now?
So this is 20.
Okay.
So a few things happened, and the context to it was not like we met and he was like, oh, let's make a better goggle. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let's quit our jobs and go all in on this.
So I want to dive in on the journey from the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if we dial back a bit first, Bo and I, we started our first company together when I was 18. So actually the same year as I did that La Marmotte race in France. Completely different type of business, a SaaS business. It was actually pretty successful, but we were limited by legislation, and we were waiting on the European Commission adopting these policies across all of Europe, and then we could expand our business from Denmark to all European markets. That never really happened. So after a few years, I was like, hey, I want to scale it down and get some corporate experience. And then I spent 4 years working with mergers and acquisitions in the media industry and the chemicals industry. But it meant that Bo and I, we had some experience in working together in that first startup. So the idea of the goggles, and it was more like, hey, this could be our next thing that we would do together. Bo was a senior executive in a big IT tech company, had 600-700 guys under him in his divisions. I was in M&A, and so we were like, we really needed some good reasons why we should quit those paths and bet on this. So one of the first things we did was that we called Niklas, our third co-founder. He was a pro swimmer, went to Europeans. He was an IM swimmer, breaststroker, really technically savvy swimmer. And we were like, hey, Niklas, what do the upper echelon of the swimming world, what do they do with goggles? And he was, and I remember this vividly. He said, well, competitive swimmers, they try a lot of different goggles, and then they stick with the least worst, and that's what they use the rest of their life. And it was just it was kind of, okay, even the best swimmers in the world, if they stick with the least worst, there's something we can fix, right? Then we started researching and understanding the market and found out that there's a shit ton of people that swim. It's not only the Michael Phelps and triathletes of the world, it's the recreational market, like people who just go and do laps in the local pool. That market is massive. There's 70 million people that swim for fitness purpose. And I was like, okay, those guys, they buy one pair of goggles on average per year. That's interesting. There's a lot of people we can get this product on.
So that's interesting.
I think that was kind of when we were like, okay, this is interesting. This is a good opportunity.
So I'll dial back. So that number there of 70, and I'm sure you guys went. You obviously went and did the market research. So I'll take a step back. So it's really interesting. You obviously had your first. So you and Bo had experience running businesses together.
Yep.
Can I dive in? Like your skill sets, are they complementary? Like in terms of your formal background or education, how did you guys divide your first business up? You said Bo was on the he was obviously more on the technology side, and you've obviously have more experience with media and marketing potentially. Is that how it sits today?
Yeah. So that is in large how it sits. It's Bo is tech, and he's a really strong innovator. So he's really good at piecing a lot of very complicated puzzles together and finding a solution. Everything from tech to hardware to manufacturing and value chains. So I think that's his superpower, together with general management, like being head of a business with hundreds of employees requires some managerial skills.
Very valuable skill in a co-founder.
Yeah, not
Not
that we can apply that right now. We're not 600-700 people in the business, but that's a huge part of his skill set. Then me and Niklas, we are more on the commercial marketing, activation, getting the product out. I would say we're very complementary to one another. There's also a big difference in what we are interested in. Right, I'm very interested in the marketing and the commercial aspects. Bo is more interested in making sure that we have the best product, and I'm also interested in that. But we have those different. It's divided in that sense. Then Niklas, he's a true product expert. The amount of time that he has spent wearing goggles and understand the intricacies of what should we expect from swimming goggles, he is really a strong expert in that way. Yeah.
And could I ask, and I'm sure you went through this, so we're up to, you obviously have found your co-founding team, which it sounds to me like it's a perfect synergy between the combinations of your skill sets. Bo was obviously planning to go ahead and he would take control of the production and the technology and the innovation, which obviously is an incredibly important part of the Magic5 business, is the actual how you guys, and we'll talk about a bit, how you guys have actually been able to create this technology to make custom goggles for every customer. You've identified the space that there were 70 million recreational swimmers that are buying one pair of goggles per year, which, as you know, that's an addressable market, definitely big enough to go after when you're looking at a niche sport.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? Obviously, then went and did you obviously would have done your industry analysis. Is it fair to say at the time, like there was a global monopoly in goggles? Like was Speedo? Was Speedo the global, the global leader by how far?
There's a few big brands in the industry that most people know of: Speedo, Arena, TYR maybe. Arena and TYR are much more focused on the competitive aspect, but Speedo is really the big brand across all the product categories in swimming. And they target recreational and competitive swimmers. I think the interesting thing that we learned about swimming goggles in particular is that the brand affinity that a customer has to the product is next to nothing.
Yeah.
Because you don't really have any emotion ties in your one size fits all goggle.
Yeah.
You stick with the least worst goggle, but it's not like you have a strong preference for your Nike sneaks or something like that.
Absolutely, it's more less.
It's categorized more as it's random where you end up because you go for the least worst goggle in terms of fit. And I think that was really where we was like, okay, the core of the swimming goggle is to make sure that you don't get water in your eyes when you swim, right? It has to make sure you can dive in the pool, focus on what is important about swimming, and that's your technique. It's how you feel the water, it's how you are in the water. It's very, very contrary to, like if we talk about triathletes, it's very contrary to cycling and running. Cycling and running is all about your data, analyzing your different intervals, zones that you're in, how you structure your training. But the vast majority of swimmers, also competitive swimmers, but especially triathletes, what matters and what makes you better is that you enjoy your time in the pool, right? Is that you focus on becoming a better swimmer, focus on your technique, get your hips up, get your strokes correct, like improve your drills, spend 10 times as long time doing your drills than you do right now. Then you'll become a better swimmer. So it was all those emotional things. It was like, okay, what is important about the goggle? What is important for swimmers? And that is to get a better time spent in the pool, right? That's what eventually will make you a better swimmer. And that's basically what we want to solve. Then when we did the initial strategic cornerstones of the business, there's a few things that was important for us. One was that we hit a price point where we felt that everyone could join in on the fun. Basically, it would not be difficult to make a custom product for Michael Phelps if we would charge $500, right? Everyone could do that if you had a little bit of engineering finesse. So it was, how do we make a goggle that sits in the normal high-end part of the market and make a good product and still make money on it? And that really led us to, okay, we need to develop the scanning technology that goes into your phone so you can scan your face no matter where you are and do that very easily. And we needed to develop a fitting technology that could go in and automatically figure out, based on algorithms, how do I fit the goggles to Damien's face, and then Michael Phelps the day after, and Jan Frodeno right? And do all of that automated. So when you as a customer buy a goggle, scan your face, in a few minutes, our robots are ready to go in and customize your product. And that whole tech stack is something that we've developed from the scratch. And when we laid the foundation for that in late 16 was when this was 17, was where we kind of got that epiphany and said, okay, if we can do this with goggles, we can also do it for ski goggles, helmets, shoe products, basically any product where fit is a parameter to the quality of the product, a faster product or more comfortable product or whatever it is. We can use our methodology to make those products, attack those product categories and make them better. So that's a long-term ethos and vision, right? But for now, we are 100% focused on goggles and
So I'm keen to circle back to what you were saying there. You said that you noticed, and one thing I've learned about you is you're very detail driven, and you've got an amazing way of understanding your market and how, and obviously how, and it's just your background, right? You've got to think, if we can create this technology, this innovation, how do we acquire a customer? That's where you're very similar to me. That's immediately like there's two problems: creating the product, which in your case was going to be a difficult. And then how do you, when you've identified that there's a low switching cost, you've said the brand loyalty on a particular product such as goggles was low, that gives you an opportunity to be able to go, okay, if switching costs are low and loyalty is low, how then are we then going to move what had traditionally been, if I'm right, a low price point for a goggle up to a price point that is still within affordability when you compare it to a bike or a wetsuit, for example, or for a triathlete. But how do we move them away from maybe a €40 price point to it's a really interesting, and they're the puzzles that entrepreneurs and you and I love discussing, because it's how do you then educate on, okay, up until now a one size fits all model, yes, is going to cost this, but this is what we're creating. So I'm really intrigued by that, and something that you guys seem to identify really, really early. I will ask you a little bit later about what you've then identified in those other product categories, which I know. The technology in the goggles is obviously the product now, but that's really not what the Magic5 company can do. The ethos of the company is creating the category is custom sportswear, really. Is that fair to say? Like, if you guys kind of identified, like that's where that's your total addressable market, really, in the technology you guys have developed.
Exactly, and that's how we see it, and that's how we that's our long-term vision. I think because it's so, the whole idea of buying something online, then grabbing your phone and scanning your face or scanning your foot or scanning your hand or whatever it is. The technology partnership we're doing with Canyon Bikes is not about your head. I can't say what it is that we are scanning, but that's a completely different body part, right? That whole concept is super, super innovative, and we're working on both changing someone's mindset when you buy, and then make them realize, hey, this is actually possible. It's not a hoax. It's not a scam. It's not magic. It's actually true, right? You can scan your face and get a custom product in no time, and it doesn't cost more than any other product. So for us, it's like that could be a way where we'd go out and get a lot of venture capital and try to take over the world in no time. I think we have been very focused on owning our technologies and making sure that everything is in place, right? It doesn't mean that you can't make mistakes, but it's when you do something where ground research is required, where you can't go on Google and find someone who has a similar technology and license that. It's something that we develop from the get-go. It's just super important that you don't rush the process.
Absolutely. So you mentioned there about venture capital, and I know every interview you've done, everyone always ends up at this place with you guys because it is such an important part of the story. Let's talk funding. Let's talk capital. We all know technology, creating even software technology like your app on the phone, but the hardware technology required with the robotics to build the goggles, it doesn't come cheap. So it's a famous story. You obviously went on to Shark Tank. So at some point in the journey, you've realized that this might be beyond having to bootstrap and that there would be funding required. Is that fair to say? Or was it more that you felt that you wanted potentially an investor that would add more strategic value than just capital? Or was it a combination of both?
Could you repeat the question, Damon?
So my question was, you guys identified the space, you identified that there would be a software and also a hardware tech part of the business, which we obviously realize does not come cheap. Everybody knows the story about Mark Cuban's investment and the Shark Tank episode that is very famous in the Magic5 story. Could you talk to me at what stage did you guys realize that potentially you either needed funding and that maybe the growth of the business was going to, or the creation of the product was going to be beyond, the bootstrapping capabilities? So you went out and found venture capital funding, or was it more that, that you actually wanted the strategic advice, or was it a combination of both?
We knew pretty early on that we needed some kind of funding because some of the robots that we use, building a hardware product from the get-go required some cash, right? So we started from day one. We did a Kickstarter campaign. That's how we got off the ground and raised some Kickstarter. So that was a good initial boost when you start from scratch. We've gotten a little bit of funding along the way from customers actually.
Okay.
That has reached out and who high net worth individuals who kind of share that same long-term vision and is excited about the product. That's what they bought, but are also excited about the long-term vision of the addressable market of custom, more like custom products. Then as for Shark Tank and Mark Cuban, I think it was a combination of funding and strategic partners, and of course also the awareness. It's been a huge awareness boost to the business. You're able to tell a story about your brand in a different way when you're on that type of show than if you just have a website or the social channels and stuff like that. So it was a combination of all the things. Then going into the show and having such a great experience and leaving with a deal. So we technically made a deal with Robert Herjavec on the show, but then Mark Cuban reached out afterwards and was like, "Hey, are you guys okay if me and Robert split the deal?" So I'm part of it. I was like, "Yes, of course, that's a no-brainer. Go get it."
Yeah, no brainer.
And then Mark has actually been tremendously active and friendly and responding on emails, and which is surprising that he's been that active. But we're just happy with that. Yeah.
So phase one is complete. Obviously, the Shark Tank episode happened, which guys, I recommend if anyone hasn't seen Bo and Rasmus on the US Shark Tank. Very easily YouTube, type in Magic5 Shark Tank, you'll see it. It's an incredible pitch, probably one of you can see from the moment that you guys start speaking that there was immediate interest from the Sharks, which doesn't always happen, and that would have been, I imagine, very nice when you're put in that position. So from there, obviously, the initial funding for now was proof of concept on the Magic5 goggles. You have given us a little bit of an insight, which I imagine a lot of our listeners today will be very interested hearing about the potential of what's to come next. And you mentioned partnership with Canyon and obviously bikes. I don't think it's too hard to guess which body parts might have the ability to be customed on a Canyon bike. But hey, we won't go any further there. Let's not give the secrets away. But I'm excited to see what you guys are doing for the next phases. Rasmus, then the team. You're based in the US, obviously Danish background. You just were saying off air that you have now operations split between the US and Denmark. Is that Denmark now covering European market and New York covering the US? Is that the reasoning for the split now?
Yes. So Europe accounts for 40% of our business approximately. So setting up production and operations in Copenhagen has allowed us to cut a week in fulfillment time for European orders, and that's why we did.
That's big.
It's not because it's cheaper or smarter. It's more complicated for us, but it's about giving the customers a better experience. So that's why we did that. And then the operation here in the US is covering the rest of the world. And it's a really good setup we have. If you're a customer from Europe, the order routes to Copenhagen and the team there will produce it. If you're anywhere else in Australia, we will take it here and ship it to Australia. So that's the reasoning behind that. I think the next phase for us is we've been an online business, online focused business, and get our foot grounded with that model. And the next thing for the Goggle business is that we are seeing a lot of the competitor swimmers really picking up on the product. We have some really cool announcement coming out pretty soon on Olympic swimmers, which we're super excited about. And then the whole open water swimming is something that's really exploding these years. People traveling for swim vacations, like your Ironman just for open water swimming is amazing. And we actually just today announced the global partnership with Oceanman. They host 20 events all around the world where you can go swim 2.5, 4K or 10K, 2.5, 5K and 10K distances. And then like getting more on the ground, we're launching a retail concept and getting out in front of people in real life with the product through retail partners is a huge priority for us. Starting up, basically, I've just started up. And then new products and other things than goggles is, I think, and you probably appreciate this, one of the things you need to be most aware of is that you don't drown yourself in too many new things as a small company. So there's a lot of things that would be super cool to do, and we get a lot of inbound interest from different companies wanting us to work with them on different products, but we really need to prioritize and say, hey, we'll stay in our own lane until we're big enough, and then we'll expand when the time is right.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We have this internally with our own team because you live and breathe what you're doing, and the ideas are never far between. And I'm finding definitely personally managing our team at the moment, like everyone is so enthusiastic, particularly when there's traction and there's momentum. It is very difficult, and I kind of call it the outside noise. And definitely, as a founder and a leader of a small team, and a business that has traction, a big part of your job is to be able to filter that noise. It's to gather it coming in from everywhere, filter it in to then be able to deliver it in a manner across projects and across timing. And the reality is that some projects are probably the next great thing for your company, but you've got to wave goodbye to them and say, okay, see you in 18 months, because it's just not feasible. I definitely sympathize with that. And what I want to discuss with you now, that's a great segue, because we've got a little bit more time, but every venture, every business comes with its challenges. And I'm sure the MAGIC5 has been no different. Do you want to talk us through potentially some of the challenges, be it more acute on a product, on the product side, potentially a more macro challenge, maybe even talk about how you guys moved through COVID as well. I think everyone would be very interested to know the realities, because it's not always a linear trajectory, as we know with business.
I think if there's one thing that you can guarantee if you start a business, like growth is not going to be linear or exponential as like timeline wise. You hope that it will go up over time, but the way there's going to be probably like and then a little bit back, and it's yes at times, right? I think COVID for us was that's when you really need to pull out your athlete mindset and focus on the process and keep grinding. COVID was amazing for basically all other, I think, sports industries, except for swimming and sports where you had to stay inside in an enclosed environment. All swimming pools closed, so like our numbers and everything was from going up to basically nothing overnight. And
Yeah.
we had to just pause our business, tell every partner we work with, like, hey guys, like, read this, we can't do anything. And then
Wow.
we adjusted, took a week, put everything on pause, did what we could to reduce costs, and then was like, okay, now we can't just sit in our hands. What do we do? And then we heard that EMT workers in Denmark had started to use their goggles as protective equipment. This was like early days of COVID. So what we ended up doing was, and we got featured in New York Times and everything, was that we donated a big portion of the inventory that we had of our non-custom goggles. So, and went out and said, okay, all EMT workers come get goggles. And then we made a crowdfunding campaign to support the COGS, the cost of goods sold for the product. We couldn't afford just to give it away, but we were like, okay, we can get someone to finance the inventory cost, then we will spend all the inventory on getting goggles out to EMT. So we had like, I think we ended up donating 600 or 900 goggles to EMT. I can't remember, but that was like a project that gave us some kind of purpose in those months where everything was just.
And if life gives you lemonade, like if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. I love that idea, and it's there's so many stories over COVID like that, because I didn't even consider, as you said, like swimming pools around the world were probably the first things that was shut off, and maybe probably the last thing that was reopened, and it would have been an incredibly challenging time. But yeah, a really good lesson for anyone there, guys. When you're faced with this type of challenge, I suppose there's one way to handle it. Put your head in the sand, or there's another way, and try and strategically work out how you can, firstly potentially, philanthropically help people. That's an amazing thing you guys did. But also, as you said, with that comes earned media that you don't pay for. You get featured in your, there are upsides to coming up with creative ways to use your technology or your business or your skill set to be able to gain traction as well. I think that's that's really unique. One of the things I was keen to chat to you about now as well was, let's dive into a little bit what you were saying about retail. For us as an omni-channel business, I've always been very, and our strategy has always been to meet the customer where they are. We know that an endurance athlete right now, and actually a wider fitness and supplement consumer, there is still what we found out of COVID. People, they love in-person shopping as well, and mainly because of the nature of the specialty retail channel that is endurance. Those store owners or retailers come with a huge amount of influence and also expertise in the space. So that's why we wanted to make sure that was a really key part of our strategy. So we could have the product where the customer spends a lot of their time, whether it's a group ride, a shop ride. Talk to me about the strategy with goggles. Obviously, not a huge specialty channel, but there is certainly a lot of pools that have a lot of shops, which for me is probably where you guys are thinking, I imagine. I mean, in Australia here, it's probably the second biggest thing after supermarkets.
Yeah, and it's it's not quite like that in Denmark, but the US has a lot of pools as well, right? So it's particularly in mid to south part of the country here. I think our product is a little bit it's innovative, like the pillar products, right? One is that you can research a bit about why is magnesium good and all these benefits from it. But for a lot of customers, there's only so much that social media can do, and an ad on Instagram, and we try to serve the message in the best possible way and cut through all the noise and the cat videos and Instagram and grab your attention. But that channel will never be able to compete with someone in a store who knows what they're talking about, who have your face.
Yeah, I totally agree.
For us, it's a little bit this back to why haven't we done it before? Well, building out a new channel requires cash and energy and effort, and it's not like I'm going to go in this podcast and say, oh, we want to build our retail channels, and then I'll get like 2,000 requests, and I'm just sitting back and I can go to Bahamas and do nothing, right? It takes a lot of
would be nice.
Yeah, like I think I'll probably just say, okay, great, now we will make all the product, but it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time, and you need to focus on one lane at a time, and then you can move to the next. And I think for us, now is a good time, I think, we think is to dive into this channel. We've also done some tests with smaller retail partners to figure out, okay, what's the right model that works for the consumer in the store, works for the retailers, and work for us. And it's similar if you wear contacts or eyewear. You go to a specialty store, you get your measurements made, and then in a few weeks you can go back to that specialty store and pick up your glasses, or they'll get sent to you, right? It's the same for us. In a specialty store, multi-sport store, you go in, you've seen the brand online, but someone who is educated behind the counter can tell you all the benefits, right? And will be able to scan your face in the store, and then you get the product shipped home to you. It won't take a few weeks. It will take a few days, right? So it doesn't take as long time as a prescription eyewear. But that's really the model and what we're rolling out, and I think that will be super. I think it's super exciting. I think it's some of the feedback that we have heard from retailers is that all retailers want something that creates engagement in the store, right? And gives you a good reason to come in and scan your face and like, oh, what's good? Like, do that and demystify it as well, right? But do that. And then it's always nice for a retailer to have something that is like clearly differentiated from all the other products. Then the customer might still prefer something else or don't want to pay $60 instead of $50 for it. But that's our rationale and thinking behind it and what we're rolling out. So I think that we're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, I am as well. I'm very bullish on that channel for the Magic5. I think the experiential side of what you guys can bring to the specialty market, I think from a retailer perspective, I can see how, you know, as you've said, that shock and awe and excitement for the customer and added reason to enter the store there's a huge upside there. Because as you've said, I think you really articulated, and I highly recommend anyone who's wanting to go into product business and you're looking into retail, what Rasmus said before about it, the deal, like a relationship with retail can never be what's good for you. It has to be what's good for the customer in equal parts, good for the retailer, and then good for the supplier as well. It is a synergy, and if it ever breaks down there, then all the power imbalance changes. You're not going to have a very long-lasting relationship, and you know you've always been very strategic the way you think long-term and test different channels until you get that perfect mix. And I think, you know, the way when you guys do enter that space, I can see it being very, very positive for all three parties. So all the best with it, Rasmus. I'm going to finish us up there. I do want to end with, we've spoken retail, but for now, magic5.com, still the best place for anyone to go and check out the tech. And guys, I really recommend you do. If you're a swimming buff or if you're potentially not a swimmer, but you just love seeing cool technology, you should really take a look at what the guys have built here. Have a look at the app, because maybe you're not a swimmer, but it sounds to me like there might be products around the corner for you. And have a look at what these guys are doing. It's an incredible brand run by very, very smart, very driven people that are trying to make what we all do better with custom sports equipment. Rasmus, thanks for your time, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.